When I was a kid, no one ever told me anything about emotions. All of the people around me that loved me and took care of me, friends, teachers, parents, they didn't know sort of what to do with emotions because their parents didn't know and their teachers didn't know and their preachers didn't know. Because by and large, our society doesn't really know what to do with emotions. In fact, in some ways, we're not even aware of what's happening from the neck down. So through the course of my addiction, when I got off drugs, the thing that I didn't like about life, was this thing that I was trying to numb out, which was my experience from the neck down. And yet, whatever was happening energetically in the body in terms of negative emotions was still there. It was there, and yet I didn't have anything to medicate it anymore. And I noticed that every time I went into my mind, what I was trying to do was to feel better. Either if I was trying to change a viewpoint about myself, if I had a negative self-image that would arise with some feeling in the body, the mind would sort of search its database to kind of correct that image, defend a self, or relabel myself. And then somehow that would kind of work sometimes. I would relabel myself as being okay, repairing the ego. And then a sense that everything was okay would kind of settle in for a while, and I would get a sense again of completeness. But pretty soon, it would just happen again. Something in the body, fear, resentment, anger, frustration, irritation. And there was no awareness of it from the neck down. And so the mind would just search its database to kind of emphasize some viewpoint that would give me a sense that everything's okay. And I would sort of just, it's like almost a lie to yourself. It's like you start to believe a negative thought, and the mind will sort of try to correct it with a positive thought, or it'll distract by picking up some food or something outside ourselves to kind of give us some relief from the experience of what's happening from the neck down. And again, when I was a child, nobody told me that, you know, what you can do is just experience directly what's happening from the neck down. Like, no one said that in the midst of the fear, you could just kind of notice the viewpoint that you're in about the future and just bring attention into the body where the feeling is, and just allow that emotion to just be there as it is, as an arising within the space of awareness, but without any label on it. Nobody told me to do that. So as I watched my mind try to deal with, as I got clean, when I watched my mind try to deal with emotions, and I started to watch everybody else, everybody's sort of doing the same thing, is that we're looking into our intellectual viewpoints about ourselves, about other people, about life, religion, spirituality, politics. We're relying on those viewpoints in order to deal with kind of what's happening energetically to us. Because if you notice, we all sort of carry around, egos carry around a sense of restlessness, a sense of discomfort, and sometimes just negativity. And all of that searching in the mental database, the everyday incessant thinking, is sort of trying to figure out life, trying to figure out the self, figure out others, so that there can be a sense of harmony, a sense of completeness. And yet it really doesn't work. And I noticed that it didn't work. And I noticed that there wasn't any mental and emotional stability in completely relying on my intellectual viewpoints. And I noticed that the other way doesn't work either, the other way being this idea that if I just keep working in my life, if I just keep going in the story, somehow, somewhere, I'm going to stumble upon something or somebody or some situation which will free me of all the negativity or the restlessness or the uncomfortable sensations and emotions from the neck down. And that didn't work either. Because even if I found a person in a relationship or a substance or an activity or a situation or a job or whatever, I might have a momentary release where I felt okay, but pretty soon some negative feeling would rush up in the body. And then the movement to sort of avoid that feeling would arise again. Movement towards the future to find something or somebody to cover that up, to make me feel better. And so the futility of all that, the absolute futility of all of that, started to be seen. And it left me only in one place, which was to just rest in the completeness of my present experience without trying to change anything. And that meant observing what was happening in the body directly without thinking about it. Because the thinking was trying to be used oftentimes to avoid the feeling, to avoid what was happening down here, to try to work something out up here. It was like bypassing the feeling, distracting and avoiding the feelings. And the same is true of the intellectual viewpoint. So I turned towards the feeling, which it's just an expression to say, I simply noticed the viewpoint that I had been emphasizing about the feelings. I noticed the rationalization of the feelings. I noticed the seeking thought. And just through observing it, without analyzing it, it would just naturally quiet just for a moment. And then in that moment, now I have an opportunity, a new opportunity to experience energetically what's happening in my body, and I would just rest there. And pretty soon it would be like the swell of something. It might be fear, or sadness, or loneliness, or lack, or discomfort. But when I saw the label arise for those things, I would just notice the label. Because the label, the thought, loneliness, never experiences loneliness, the feeling of loneliness, which is in the body. The thought is merely a label. It can't see anything. It can only arise and fall. Thoughts arise and fall. So I knew that emphasizing that label was not going to allow me to face the actual suffering in my experience, so I would just notice the label and it would pass too. All the labels like fear, sadness, grief, anger, irritation were seen to be these little flickers of thought that I didn't have to emphasize anymore. And as I stopped emphasizing them and I started to just be with my experience, just to allow the awareness in my body to be aware of the emotions without labels, I started to notice that all of that's happening in a completeness, a sense that everything, you could call it awareness or presence, but it's just here. Before the story arises, it's just here. That sense of completeness was always here every time I would check into it, so I could trust it completely. And then I noticed that the feelings, when you just allow them to be as they are seen to be complete also, because they arise and then they just naturally dissipate when you don't label them. So they are complete. They are complete in the sense that they are sort of born out of nothing, and they just appear, and then they disappear completely, almost like a perfect arising, like a perfect movement. When I say completeness, I mean that an emotion is allowed to be exactly as it is without trying to manipulate it. That's what makes it complete. It just does what it does. It dances in whatever way it dances. And the mind no longer had to figure anything out about that. It could just allow all of that to be, and so it just became this place that I could trust. I could trust feeling whatever happened in my body, and I could trust just observing the thoughts without following them, because I knew that that didn't work. All that did was get me to avoid feelings and to chase some imaginary state in the future. And what was I chasing in the future? Some state in which I would be complete. So that was a lie, because the completeness is here. And then somehow in that, seeing that all the emotions were just complete as they're these little arisings that would just come and go, then I saw that even the stories were complete. And everything just started to be seen as this movement that would just arise and fall here within that present completeness. Nothing had to be changed. Nothing has to be changed. Everything is allowed to be as it is. And that's the answer. That was the answer that I found to the suffering, to the seeking.